Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. Thank you very much indeed for wanting to watch this video. But just before it starts, here's a short but important message. It really does take a lot of time and money to produce our events, the videos, and all the campaigning work that we do. So if you're not already a subscription member, please do become one. That's really important. You'll find all the details you need through the link that you can see on the screen now. And if for any reason you're unable to become a subscription member, please at least make a donation. You'll see the link for our donations page coming up on the screen now. And just in case you need them, the links to both of those pages are in the video description. Thank you very much. Good evening, folks. We have a huge turnout, which I'm really pleased about. We've got, I think, 45 people booked on so far, and the number's going up all the time. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Please excuse my rather serious and frankly angry disposition. The more I think about what's going on, the angrier I get, but it's all about trying to channel that anger into worthwhile, considered action. But please do forgive me if I do seem rather focused, because we're talking about things that really do matter a great deal. We're talking about things that are about as serious as they get, and we're going to keep talking about these issues until the changes that are necessary happen. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm very grateful to all of you for being with us tonight. I'll deal with a few housekeeping points, and then we'll get the ball rolling, as it were. So just in case any of you are brand new to the Transparency Task Force, which I think is the case, the TTF is a certified social enterprise. We do exist as a formal entity. We are a certified social enterprise. Our purpose, in very plain English, is to fix what is wrong with the financial services industry. And there is a great deal that is wrong with the financial services industry. As some of you will already have seen, we're able to evidence just how much wrong there is with the financial industry by reference to the violations data. In other words, the information about organizations that have been breaking the rules. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and I'm going to show you some things that you may or may not have already seen. If you have already seen them, that's fine, because it's just going to help to remind you just how bad the problem is that we are collectively trying to solve. So this screen I'm showing you is Violation Tracker UK. Violation Tracker UK came to the UK about a year ago. Prior to that, it was existing only in the US. But to cut a long story short, having discovered the US database, we reached out to the people in Washington, DC who make Violation Tracker and worked with them to bring it over here to the UK. Violation Tracker is headquartered in Washington, DC. It's produced by an NGO, a non-government office, non-government organisation that's been established for about 20 years. And our role has been to kind of champion it and to be a cheerleader for it in the UK. And I'm glad to tell you that we all had a part in making it happen. One of the reasons why this is such a powerful database is because if we actually look at the details about the different industries in the UK, then we can compare the UK's financial industry to other industries. To do that, we click on Other Summaries, and we click on the Parent Industry Totals, and it gives us a list of the different industries in the UK ranked by how much they've been penalised, fined, prosecuted. Now, I could spend a long time, gentlemen, explaining why the financial services sector as a whole should not be anywhere near the top of this list. To cut that long conversation down to just a moment or two, the reason why the financial sector should not be anywhere near the top of this list is because the very nature of the financial industry means that it has to be trusted to be successful. If you take trust out of financial services, you really have pretty much nothing left. But here we have a list, ladies and gentlemen, that shows the financial services sector has had more fines imposed against it than any other industry. And not only is it the worst behaved industry by this record, it is also the worst behaved by a long, long way. In position number 2 is aerospace and military contracting. Financial services is over, 3 times worse than that? So it's a significant outlier. That in and of itself is very sad for anybody like me that's made a living in the financial industry for many, many years to know that it is as transgressive as it is really quite sad. But the story gets worse, because if you click on financial services, as I just did, first of all, you'll get shown the worst 10 offenders, NatWest, Barclays, Lloyds, UBS, etc. So these household brands we see routinely advertising on the TV with galloping horses and all the rest of it, every time I see one of those Lloyds adverts, it frankly makes me a little bit irritated. You know, why not do something better with that advertising money, like, for example, compensate the victims of its transgressions? And if you scroll down, you get to this list, a list that shows the individual cases ranked by how big they are. Credit Suisse was at the top. And if you look at the, I think the third column in from the right, you'll see the year the case was enforced. And you'll notice that some of them are 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. So those in the industry who try to make out that banks behaving badly, for example, I'm not particularly picking on a bank, as you'll see, they're rather well represented in this list. Banks behaving badly is a thing of the past, it's all been sorted out. That really is not the truth. The truth is that, for example, Barclays were prosecuted in 2022 for consumer protection violations. Yeah, a fine of just under 11 million pounds. And as you scroll down the list, you see a pattern. The pattern is the same kind of organizations doing the same kind of things wrong and being fined. And by the way, when you get to the bottom of that very, very long list, you might think that this case here, Scottish Equitable, is the last one, but it's not. There are pages and pages and pages of this stuff. And this pattern of company does something wrong, company gets caught, company gets fined, company carries on doing something wrong, that pattern is what we call recidivism. And when I very first of all found the Violation Tracker US database, I could see a similar pattern in the USA, virtually identical. The financial services sector has recidivist tendencies. Now that in and of itself is very worrying, but when you then realize But what's actually happening here is as follows. The individuals within the companies who run and lead those companies, who are responsible for its governance and its conduct, under their watch, the company does something wrong. The company gets caught. The shareholders get fined. The innocent shareholders, individuals like us, pension scheme members like us, we're the ones who get fined because the company gets fined, and that means the shareholders are being impacted. But very, very, very often, and I mean this literally, very, very often, the individuals responsible for the culture and the processes and the sales drives and the initiatives that actually lead to the misbehavior, very, very often, they go scot-free. And I promise you, I'm not making this up. We have hard evidence that not only do they sometimes go scot-free, they sometimes get promoted to becoming lords in the House of Lords, for example. This is serious stuff. There is something going seriously, seriously wrong. And that's why the Transparency Task Force exists, because we collectively should not be willing to tolerate that state of affairs. Now, I said something earlier that might indicate that the UK is just like all the other countries, but in actual fact, it is worse than that, because the UK has created a reputation of being one of the world's centres for illicit money flows. That's a real worry. Andy Candy emailed me something earlier today. It was about Rishi Sunak's speech, talking about the importance of rebuilding trust and confidence and integrity and all those lovely, lovely words. Frankly, if the UK government wants to drive a rebuilding trust agenda, it really needs to seriously think about what's going on in the financial sector, because there's something seriously wrong with it. And of course, if the primary purpose of the Financial Conduct Authority is to govern and moderate the conduct of the financial industry, it's obviously failing to do that. If the FCA was doing a good job, if the FCA was doing a good job, the financial sector would not repeatedly be the worst offending industry in the UK. It's as simple as that. Now, I know the FCA has got some great big challenges, but all the time I hear various people talk about, how brilliantly regulated the UK's financial sector is. In actual fact, it's not. If you scrutinise the data, you will come to the same conclusion that I've come to, which is that there is something seriously wrong with the conduct in the financial industry, and by extension, there is something seriously wrong with the way that the financial industry is being regulated. And I'm happy to argue those points with anybody till the cows come home. So what do you do? What can we do? Well, we had an idea at roughly this time last year. One of the problems is that when you consider the heartache and the suffering caused by the financial industry, it's often just abstract numbers, X number of fines or Y number of people who've killed themselves, etc., etc., etc. And what we wanted to try to do was really show the true human cost and suffering as a consequence of what's been going on. Now, just before I go further, please let me make one point really clear. The vast majority of the people in the industry are absolutely innocent. Yeah, I've worked in financial services since August the 18th, 1986, and I can promise you the vast majority of the people I worked with and alongside were honest, decent, hard-working people. And frankly, most of the organisations in the industry are also decent organisations, and some of them are spectacularly good. I won't mention any now, but there are some wonderful companies in the financial services sector who treat ethics and integrity and stewardship and governance and ESG really seriously. And they're almost living a mission in terms of wanting to reform the industry. So please don't make the mistake of thinking I'm saying the entire industry is rotten to the core. It's not, but it is rotten to the core in parts. And the relationship between the City of London and the regulators and the Treasury is not quite right. There's a lack of transparency. The dynamic is too cozy. These aren't just words. I can back this up. For example, it's been in the Times. It's been in the Times that when the FCA, well, I'll cut to the chase. The Treasury has been caught on at least one occasion trying to influence the decision making of the supposedly independent regulator. The Treasury and the banks, reported in the Times, were caught trying to influence the financial regulators. And what were they trying to do? I'll be blunt about it. I'm in that kind of mood. I hope you don't mind. They were trying to persuade the FCA to reduce the amount of compensation payable to totally innocent business owners, some of whom have built businesses from scratch over decades, whose businesses were completely trashed by predatory, aggressive tactics by the banks. The Treasury and the banks tried to convince the FCA to reduce the amount of people who could get compensation for what had been done wrong. Think about that for a minute. Think about that for a minute. You're a Treasury official or you're a bank official and you think it's okay to try to convince a supposedly independent regulator to reduce the amount of compensation these totally innocent people are going to get for the toxic mis-selling of ultra high risk products that these poor folks should never have been sold because they were never given the small print, they were never told the truth. Now, interestingly enough, we know because of the recent activity around pension schemes and the Bank of England having to bail out the situation, we know that all the people who for years, like for example, Steve Middleton, for years have been saying the banks were fraudulently selling margin credit products, it's all turned out to be absolutely provably true. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're picking up from me a sense of annoyance and anger and kind of disgust, you're picking it up right. That is how I feel right now. But what we've all got to do is channel our energy and our anger into constructive thinking that turns into good, healthy campaign activity. And that's what the Transparency Task Force is all about. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why many of you are doing what you're doing as well. The sense of purposefulness within our community is absolutely off the scale. I'm telling you that now. The sense of purpose within our community is like nothing I've ever seen before. For example, Thursdays at 5 o'clock, there's a bunch of people who meet religiously to strategize and figure out tactics to how to campaign around various issues. Some of those folk I'm so proud to be associated with. Some of those folk are here with us tonight. And we are making real progress. We're making progress in terms of discovering the evidence to back up our narrative, which is that there's something going seriously wrong in the UK's financial sector, and that part of that problem is a failure by the regulators to regulate properly. Now, you're going to be hearing from some people who've lived lives they should not have lived, whose lives have been harmed and damaged and hurt in one way or another as a consequence of the kind of things that we're talking about this evening. The Faces of Financial Crime publication, which is here. Some of you have seen this before. Some of you got hard copies of it. We're really proud of this. When I say words like we're really proud of it, I mean that. We are really proud of it. We are really proud of it because we're doing things that others just simply aren't doing. And we're doing things that really matter, really matter. And we're doing them with buttons. You know, thank goodness we had some financial support for what we did, because how would we have done it otherwise? But even if we didn't have any money, we would have somehow done it, because it needs to be done. There's a Mark Twain quote. I think about this quote so often. And whilst I may be broke in many, many ways, repeat, whilst I may be broke in many, many ways, in at least one way, I've got to be one of the richest, wealthiest people on this planet. And that's because of what I'm about to say. Mark Twain, a quote that gets me through when the times are tough, and there are tough times. The quote is, "The two most important days in a man's life are, number one, the day he's born, and number two, the day he realizes why." And what I'm doing in the TTF and what we are doing collectively feels so right and so purposeful. It kind of fits like a glove. I believe I'm doing what I should be doing right now in terms of being a campaigner, working with you all, doing what we're all doing. Let me share with you a few further thoughts. This is our Faces of Financial Crime document. It's available online. I'll put a link to where you can download it if you haven't already seen it. It's got lots of pictures in it. Every one of these pictures tells a story of somebody I can identify with within the Transparency Task Force community. For example, the lady in the corner there who's having emergency medical attention. There are people in the TTF community who've had to have medical attention. There are people who routinely get chest pains at night because of the anguish that they get. The gentleman here who's got his hands up at his face, he's going nuts with rage and anguish. The lady here who looks like she's been sobbing for hours and hours, probably because she's sobbing. Look at this family here. When we decided to put this family's picture in, we put it in because it's a family. None of them are looking at each other. They're all looking in a state of despair. The husband and the wife are looking at each other because that is a family under serious stress. There's a lady here with us tonight who I think about when I see this picture of the lady near the gravestone. You see the crucifix, you can see the cross. It's a lady I'm proud to say I've got to know quite well over the last year and a half or two. I'm going to tell you something that I've told a few people, and I'm not ashamed to tell you it now. The lady I'm thinking of, and I won't mention her name, she may or may not want to mention herself later. One day on Zoom, she and I were having a conversation, and she explained to me how her husband had tried to kill himself, and thankfully he failed. But the extreme, and I do mean extreme, the extreme stress and anguish that he and she had gone through led to him having a very, very early death. No doubt about it in her mind, or frankly mine, that it was caused directly as a consequence of what they'd been through. When this lady, and frankly this lovely lady, the most, so easy to like, you instantly like her because you're such an honest, straightforward human being, a tender, caring, loving human being. She told me something on the Zoom call that made me cry, and I'll never forget this moment. There she was telling me what had happened. She started crying. I started crying. We were both literally on Zoom crying. We weren't talking. We couldn't talk anymore. I was crying because of what I was hearing her saying. She was crying, thinking about what it was she was saying to me, and we just cried. It was as if we were in the same room together. It's as if we'd known each other for years. I'll never forget that moment. And I've been trying not to cry, because you know what it's like when you talk to somebody who's upset. The last thing you want to do is to start crying, because it kind of makes it even worse. I was trying not to cry, but she said something to me that made me feel so much pain and anguish for her and for her family. I just couldn't help it, and I just burst out crying. The kind of crying a 6 or 7-year-old does, like absolutely naked, raw sorrow. And it's when she told me that the court process that she went through and the legal action that happened, it's when she told me that through that legal process, she and her legal team ended up getting a recording of a conversation. A recording of a conversation between her now deceased husband and the bank official. He was in tears on this call, begging the bank, literally begging the bank to treat them in a more humane and civilized way. And when she said this to me, I just momentarily imagined what would that be like if my wife heard a conversation of me begging a bank to be treated humanely, knowing that the bank had been outrageously unfair. By the way, all of this absolutely proven and provable. This isn't just like, someone with a bit of an axe to grind. All this is absolutely true. So when we put the pictures together for the Face of the Financial Crime, we thought long and hard about which images to use. And I'm just telling you that one picture of the lady in sorrow next to the crucifix at a graveside reminds me of that particular lady and that particular conversation. And we are talking about a major international household brand bank who have been caught on many occasions doing outrageous things. When I see this guy here counting the money at the kitchen table with his family, they're figuring out what they can afford, what they can't afford. There are so many people who are financially destitute as a consequence of financial crime and malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, and mis-selling by the financial industry. The picture here of the lady, you can see the bottom half of her, you can see her legs, and the chap. I imagine in my mind, he has just told her, the husband has just told the wife that he, let's say, invested £40,000 or some huge amount of money in some investment scheme that turned out to be a scam. He's just told her. We know there are members of the Transparency Task Force community. Listen to this. It's one of the saddest things I can think of. There are members of the Transparency Task Force community who I know have lost their entire life savings, i.e. their pension fund, to scammers, who haven't yet had the courage to tell their wives about it. And this has been going on for years. I think of that dynamic when I think of that particular picture. I imagine he's just told the wife what's happened, and she, quite understandably, is outraged. This picture here, the young couple, that's a brother and sister. In my mind, I imagine it being a brother and sister at a graveside. The parent has passed away through one reason or another. The elderly gentleman in the hospital. At the end of the paper, and I'm going to quickly go through here, we get to the opposite side of the story. We get to the opposite side of the story. We get to the faces of the bad people. Now, some of these folk, for example, the guy here, can you see that chap with the white sort of masky face here? He obviously represents some online scammer who's doing something devious and nasty with his laptop. He's an online crook. You can all relate to that. The bloke here with the cigar and the guy with a cigar and the beard, chap here, you can kind of imagine him to be, some kind of a, crook. He just looks pretty dodgy. The guy here, obviously with the hoodie on, is representing a criminal. The bloke with the balaclava on is obviously representing a criminal. But look at these folk here, please. Look at these folk. the ones who look like they might be bankers having a conversation. I imagine they're having a conversation, it is only imagining, but I imagine they're having a conversation, for example, about interest rate hedging product sales and what ought to be done to drive up the bank's balance sheet because the bank's just been bailed out by the government. White collar criminals working in the City of London, working in Canary Wharf, working at the banks, you know, people who have done really, really nasty things to not just one or two or a dozen or a few hundred, but literally thousands and thousands of people. So that is what the Faces of Financial Crime paper is all about. We are so proud of it. We had a chance to tell the stories of 22 individuals, and we are hoping we can find the resource to do something next year with more case studies and to really bring it to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting we're having tonight is important because I'm doing everything I can to galvanize support for the idea that there is something seriously wrong with the UK's financial sector, and it's because the sector is not being properly regulated and governed. We are absolutely convinced that the level of malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling, financial crime and fraud that's going on is completely and utterly off the scale. When you hear people like Anthony Stansfeld, the former police crime commissioner, routinely state that fraud and white-collar crime, financial crime is something like 1/3 of all the crime in the UK, yet there's only about 1% of police resource being allocated to dealing with it, you know there's something seriously, seriously wrong. When you get the Financial Conduct Authority refusing to arrange for the compensation of innocent bank mis-selling victims, yeah, when you get them saying, no, we aren't going to do what the KC John Swift has said we should do, even though we spent £7 million on the independent report that he wrote, we're not going to do it, which leaves an all-party parliamentary group of parliamentarians taking the FCA to court on behalf of the victims. You've got to know there's something seriously wrong with the culture of the FCA. In a moment, literally just about a minute or so, we're going to be hearing from Peter O'Donnell, then John Goodman, then Diane and Peter Bentley, then Gordon Lee, then Andrew Page, then Clive May, then Sue Flood, then Louise Stevenson, then Andy Candy, then Ian Davis, and then from Mark Bishop. Everybody apart from Mark is going to be talking about, very, very briefly, their life experience as a victim of the kind of things we're going to be talking about. And then when we get to Mark Bishop, who I have to tell you, I've said it many times before, is doing an outrageously valuable job within the TTF. He really is. Everybody apart from Mark is going to be talking about their life experience. Mark will also talk briefly about his life experience, but then he's going to be talking about the kind of reforms that we are asking for in the Financial Services and Markets Bill. I've spent the last half an hour speaking from my heart directly to yours. I hope you've heard me. And if you have, let's make a soft commitment tonight to each other that we are going to carry on with this crusade for reform for as long as we can, to the best of our ability, because it needs to be done. Before we go to Peter O'Donnell, could I please invite you to applaud, not me, I stress this, for goodness sake, not me, but for us as a collective, yeah? There's that famous Margaret Mead quote that, you know, never doubt what a small group of committed citizens can do, because it's the only thing that ever has made a real difference. That's how I see us. I'm so, so proud to be a part of the community that I'm involved with here. I'm so proud to be doing what I do with all of you. And can we please just take a moment to tap ourselves on the back and thank ourselves for doing what we're doing, because it needs to be done. Our cause is both noble and necessary. And let's just take a brief moment to say thank you to ourselves for forming the group that we are forming and being part of the community that we are. Let's just take a brief moment to do that. Let's do it for ourselves. We're on a very rough, long, bumpy road. And every now and then we just deserve a chance to say, keep at it. We're doing the best we can. Let's keep doing so. Mr. Peter O'Donnell, please introduce yourself. All the speakers tonight, apart from Mark, we've only got time for literally 2 or 3 minutes. Just give us a very, very brief account of your situations, please, and what's happened to you. We'll go to Peter O'Donnell first of all. Peter,
hi, thanks for inviting me. Can you hear me?
Perfectly well, Peter. Go for it. Thank you.
I'm currently a director, founder, and shareholder of a law firm helping those people who've been lied to and lost primarily their pensions on the advice of financial advisors, telling them to put their pensions into scams that earn the IFAs generally 30% of the money invested, and then the scams collapse, go into the hands of insolvency practitioners, who then protect, in concert with the FCA, deliberately, they then protect the people who ran the scam and provided the advice. I'll just make a statement. The financial services regulatory system was established by only those in the financial services industry to protect themselves and not the public. And it's the design of the system that allows them to get away with murder. In my case, I was a successful businessman, sold my IT consultancy in the city, and a very close friend of mine introduced me to a bank manager who recommended an investment with a firm of chartered accountants in Leicester, and that it was such a good investment, the bank guaranteed the investment and would arrange an equity release interest-only loan, in my case, of £400,000. And I invested the money with this firm, chartered accountants, regulated. 2 weeks later, the firm was closed. The directors were arrested, and they spent 7.5 years in prison. The bank manager had no punishment, was given a golden parachute to hide him. There is a BBC program investigating him that you can download, but it's a bit pointless because no one really understood how they could get away with it. So what it did to us, we had £1 million plus house in St Albans. Things got very bad. I get very depressed, and we ended up in a council house in Kettering. I then investigated this very, very thoroughly and learnt a lot about the industry and how it works. And after 10 years in what you call the claims industry, even though it's a law firm, I'm back on my feet. But I'm a very wise businessman, a stupid wise businessman because I put the money in there, but wise in that I could recover my situation, and now I'm financially sound. But what I've learned is that companies and not individuals are accountable under financial services, as Andy said. I mean, if a surgeon cuts off the wrong leg, the hospital isn't accountable, he's accountable. If a builder uses the wrong materials and the building collapses, killing people, he's culpable. If an accountant causes bankruptcy by recommending or deliberately misleading a client, he's held accountable. If a solicitor wrongly advises clients for personal gain, he's accountable. If an IFA recommends an investment from which he personally gets 30% of the money, generally £30,000, invested, and the client complains, only the company the IFA worked for is held accountable. And of course, what they do is put themselves into insolvency. The insolvency practitioners protect them because that's the way it works. And they go and start another company because they never lose their regulatory status. So you can steal £1 million off clients by lying to them, and you stay in the industry because you're not accountable. Only the company is accountable. And this means that no one was ever gone to prison or even prosecuted the collapse of the banking system back in 2008. And if you look at FOS decisions, and there's a database of FOS decisions, there have been 8,664 pension investment complaints upheld, which is around about 5 to 10% of the total complaints since 2010. And the money paid out in compensation has been around £1 billion, which really means it's between 10 and 20 billion pounds that's been lost. If you look at all claims upheld by the Financial Ombudsman Service since 2010, there have been 87,325 upheld. Many more are not upheld, generally on spurious grounds, because they do not have to adhere to common law or legislation. They can make their own decisions. Now, I don't think these figures are included in the violation tracker, but if they were, it would make a much more interesting read. So I could go on, of course, but I believe the system is unbelievably corrupt. I've talked to many politicians, I've emailed them, I've contacted them, I've done everything, and no one's taken any interest whatsoever. I spoke to Theresa May's head of department, and he told me that no matter what I wrote, I should contact Mel Stride, the head of the Treasury Committee in Treasury, and now he's been promoted today by Rishi Sunak into a much bigger job at Department of Work and Pensions. So crime pays, and I'm an example of it, and I see many examples of it every day in my business.
Peter, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you very, very much. Every one of the stories we're going to be hearing tonight has got something slightly different, slightly unique, but the themes that you'll be hearing will be consistent. And you will have to come to the same conclusion we have, which is that there is something seriously wrong in the governance and stewardship of the financial sector in the UK. Hopefully, if John Goodman's able to take himself off mute and speak, John is different to everybody else here. John is part of the group that gave the Transparency Task Force the resource we needed to do a decent job on the paper. So I just wanted the opportunity for John to speak and introduce himself, and frankly, to simply thank him and his organisation for giving us the support. John, could you please take yourself off mute and say hello?
Yes, I've taken myself off mute. Yes, very briefly, I shan't detain us all for long. To say I'm John Goodman from the Network for Social Change. We have, as Andy said, supported this incredibly valuable and important, so groundbreaking work. We have also supported Violation Tracker UK. We have a long-term commitment to Violation Tracker. And as I said, all I want to do really is to say that we're very pleased to be associated with this work, which we think is really important and groundbreaking. And congratulations to all you and all your team, Andy, and to all the people that you've collaborated with. And let's hope that it can make some real change in this world.
John, thank you so much for the support you've given us. We literally could not have done what we did to any kind of level of quality as we did without your input and your colleagues at the network. Folks, everybody here today, please show your appreciation to John and what the Network for Social Change has been doing, because it's really, really made a difference. John, thank you. Thank you very, very much. We're going to go straight to Diane. Diane, if you could give us like 2 or 3 minutes of your story. It's worthy of like 2 or 3 hours, I know, but just as succinctly as you can, just tell everybody what's happened for you. Thank you.
Well, my story, Andy, is already in the paper, so I don't need to go through it, but I'm the nurse that was encouraged by an international, a very large international company, to move my defined benefits pension into a cure-ops. That was while I was living in France. I still am. It's legal financial rape by these offshore companies. They tell lies. It's very unethical how they behave, but it is actually legal in this country and in most of Europe, actually, what they do. They always target expats with UK pensions. That is exactly the sort of people that they're after, and it's generally done by cold calling. I mean, now we know that we shouldn't be accepting any calls from cold callers, but at the time we were very isolated, living in France, and didn't know all those things. The problem is that once your money is being transferred out of the UK, And it's then split up between 3 management type companies who are looking after your investments. So, and they're not in the same country, they're in different jurisdictions. So straight away, you've got an advisor who in our case was in France. You've got trustees in Malta or Guernsey, for example. And then quite often they're in an insurance wrapper by an insurance bond company, and they're in Ireland or the Isle of Man. So when things go wrong, when there are problems, they literally all point the fingers at each other and say, it's not me. So you could potentially have 3 jurisdictions to deal with, and we're now on our 3rd. We're now trying to get some acknowledgement of what's happened to us on our 3rd either arbitrator or ombudsman. It is an absolute nightmare. Because of this, we started a Facebook group for victims of this particular company, and we've now got over 600 members. This is victims, but unfortunately they are terrified to speak out, and you'll understand why later. And also we've got quite a few experts now. They are not recommending any products, but they are looking through our actual paperwork on the headed paper from the company and sort of drawing out the issues and the way that we've been misled and basically scammed. So they've been very helpful with us. We found that the regulators are extremely disinterested and they're far more concerned about protecting their own cosy little financial system. We've got forged signatures on application and income generating forms, unscrupulous trustees in jurisdictions that offer zero protection against scammers, and I'm talking about the small English islands. I'm not talking about some far-flung places. And the insurance companies who just don't care which Tom, Dick and Harry are selling their products. So that's the situation that we're in now. The commissions are extortionate that these companies are charging, and certainly from the financial advisory point of view, they are in the main hidden from the client. And when they do generate illustrations over how the funds will grow, they never include these commissions. So it's impossible for these investment funds to ever do much money at all, ever make much money at all. Examples of who we've got on the group, we've got a poor lady who was sold a 25-year life policy instead of the savings plan that she wanted for her child's education. The commission that's generated from the school savings plan is nothing compared to a 25-year life policy, which was the reason that we think that she was given the wrong one. These advisors do not get paid, they are on commission only, so it is in their interest to get the most riskiest and the one with most commission to sell to people. We've also got forged signatures on application and income generating forms. There was a very elderly and vulnerable family relative of one of our group members, and because he's had the trustees in court because of a lack of due diligence with his father-in-law, several documents have been uncovered, which I'm sure the trustees thought would never see the light of day, let alone the family see them. He's got 2 forensic experts to look at several of those signatures, and the likelihood is, well, it's highly probable that they are actually fakes. So we're into serious territory now. It's not only, the problem is that the only named beneficiary of this gentleman that died cannot get any money whatsoever from the trust fund, and it's basically been hijacked by the trustees. He died in 2016. The family still haven't had a penny out of that. It's an absolute disgrace. This is going through the Guernsey courts at the moment. What else did I want to say about it? I think that's about all from that. I mean, what the family have had to go through, you know, actually seeing having to go through all the father's very good actual history of what he'd been doing. Some of the signatures, and one example of a meeting that supposedly took place was 3 days after the gentleman had been cremated. And that's the level that we're dealing with. The company have got all the information, they've got the forensic expert reports and everything, and basically they're just ignoring it. So that's what we're dealing with on there. Basically, we're threatened and intimidated by the company concerned. They want to stop us posting, commenting and speaking to the press. Some people have been offered money. We did have one member who was offered £79,000 to be quiet, and credit due to him, he didn't accept it, and it was an actual Times piece, a Times article. You'll see a few Times articles about us. My name's Diane Bentley. If you have a look, there's an article called Sued, sorry, not sued, silenced, arrested and sued. I'm the lady that was sued. The lady that was arrested was also defending a defamation case in Zimbabwe, and she was arrested on the court steps and taken to a police cell and thrown in it for a day. She was let out in the evening. 4 days later, she was in hospital because of the conditions that she was put in for that whole day. I won't go into details because it's very embarrassing, but it was dreadful. She was in a concrete floor and she was given one cold, wet, urine-infested blanket. That's what she had to put up with there. I've had personally four legal letters on 2 separate occasions. And then this year I was given a slap. I don't know whether you're familiar with slaps, but it's a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And it's basically rich companies trying to silence criticism. They did it to me this year. They wanted 60,000 in damages and it cost me 17,000 to defend it. It was thrown out on technicalities. It was a definite slap. He had no chance of winning. And the really amusing thing is that when I went to court, I've been to court 3 times, and in Bordeaux, he'd just been found guilty by the regulators of being dishonest. This is the CEO of the company, found to be dishonest by the regulators and not fit and proper to be giving financial advice in South Africa. He was banned for 5 years as a result, and I was in court having to defend defamation due to this man.
Diane, we're going to cut it there.
Okay,
if I may.
You can.
Your case.
Can I just say about the FCA though, because we are linked, even though I know we're far away, that if they are allowing, I am sick to death of sending them intelligence about this company, and they are doing nothing about it. And if they want to stop scammers, you know, companies that aren't even registered with them, what they're not doing is stopping them piggybacking, partnering up or buying out FCA registered companies so that they are still able to trade in the UK. It's got to stop. It's madness, and it's just a disaster waiting to happen. And I mean, you feel emotional, I feel emotional. I'm very, very angry about this, that there's just no protection there. And that's the FCA. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Diane, thank you again for sharing your lived experience. It really is astonishing. I wish we had much more time for everybody, but we don't. We'll have to move on quickly. Okay. Andy Candy is going to be going next, if that's okay. Mr. Candy, please take yourself off mute and as succinctly as possible, give everybody a bit of a feel for what's happened to you. Your story is a particularly egregious story of something that's happened to literally thousands of people. It's just mind-blowing this has been allowed to happen in a civilized country that we all have good reason to love. Mr. Candy, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I was caught up in the interest rate hedging scandal. So we were sold a swap product in 2008, discovered the mis-selling in 2009, and have spent the last 13 years battling to get that exposed and resolved. And have been sort of categorically subjected to misconduct and malfeasance, criminal conduct by the banks, the regulators, the Treasury, all and sundry, quite frankly, as I'm sure everybody here has experienced in their own ways. You hit a brick wall when trying to raise complaints and progress them, and there's no feedback from the banks, very rarely at all. And you get the same from the Ombudsman, you get the same from the FCA or FSA as it was when we first raised the complaints. They undertake all these investigations but never give you any feedback on them. And effectively, as we're now, thanks to the work of Andy and TTF and people like Steve Middleton and Paul Carlier and others too numerous to mention, that have been doggedly pursuing this for over a decade, the scale of the fraud that's been perpetrated is just mind-blowing. And you sort of think you've been sold a simple product, but when you start burrowing into it and peeling it like an onion, it just keeps going and going and going. I basically ran a small design agency, doing reasonably well for our size, 5 staff, looking at investing in a property, and the bank just decided to commit fraud against us and just rip it all away, basically because we had an asset that it could go after, and appears to have just targeted us amongst the whole group of other clients to fill balance sheet holes in it, holes in its balance sheets by targeting SMEs for the picking for their assets. And the FCA, the regulators, Treasury, Bank of England, all appear to have conspired in that process. And when you start to talk to people about this, and friends and family, while they do believe you to a degree, there's also an element of skepticism, which we've probably all seen, where you end up not wanting to talk about this to people because you end up sounding like a conspiracy theorist. And yet, if you listen to quite an extraordinary piece of journalism by Andy Verity on the LIBOR lowballing tapes, where he's effectively got telephone conversations of the top tier of the British business, the BBA and the banks and the LIBOR panel submitters conspiring to rig LIBOR, and yet they effectively decided to target smaller traders and fit them up for the crimes that they themselves were committing. And that's the level of corruption that you're dealing with. It goes right to the very top. And that's why these things take so long to unpeel and get dealt with, because everybody's compromised. And that's the problem, is that everybody across the board at some stage within one of the regulators or the banks nostril deep in it, as I keep making the phrase. So yeah, I don't know what else I can add to that. But thanks to you and your team for providing a forum that brings expert analysis together with victims to be able to tackle this in a manner that the TTF and its sort of YouTube channel is an extremely useful resource, because it provides a public record of, numerous talks by experts that set out the details, and it's there for people to refer to, for journalists to refer to. So as a resource, it's incredibly valuable, let alone the work that you guys put into it. So as a victim myself, I'm exceptionally grateful to the work that you do, and Alexandra and Chelsea and Tracy and all the girls that do. It's amazing.
Andy, thank you very much for your lovely, lovely words. Your lovely, lovely words. Andy, just to let you know, I was thinking about you earlier today because I've had a conversation. I won't say too much because it wouldn't be appropriate, but I've had a conversation with somebody who's made many documentaries. By the way, I'm not talking BBC Panorama. I'm not talking BBC Panorama. Getting that once was a miracle. But somebody's made a series of serious documentaries, who's interested in the stuff you and I have been talking about with Steve and Paul over the last week or two. I know you know what I mean by that, but I'll update you on Thursday night, Andy. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Andy.
We're going to hear now from Gordon Neve, and then I'll probably change the order and go to Sue Flood next. So Gordon next, then probably Sue Flood. I've got to change the order a little bit, folks, so bear with me. Gordon, please take time to introduce yourself. Take yourself off mute, of course, first of all, and then just give us literally just 2 or 3 minutes. Everybody's got a feel for what your life experience has been in recent years. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Well, we're in a very unusual position in that we've had our home confiscated by Bank of Scotland when we weren't customers of the bank. We were no longer customers of the bank, and we had never borrowed any money against it. And we're also shareholders of Lloyds Banking Group and have lodged complaints with them about the injustice that's been cast upon us. And the story basically commenced in 2011. Bank of Scotland Private Banking commenced a malicious court action against my wife and I for recovery of a fabricated 695,000 unregistered FSA regulated mortgage contract they falsely claimed we had borrowed against security of our bond-free home at Murrayfield in Edinburgh, with a security value of 1.3 million. On moving to Murrayfield in 2002, our conveyancing solicitor had failed to do due diligence of the standard security, which is unique to Scots law. The bank issued to permit my continued trading at Lloyd's of London as a name under a bank guarantee, which was basically a first charge. The original standard security Bank of Scotland held over our former home showed me as the sole debtor and my wife as joint proprietor. But the replacement security dishonestly put my wife and I as joint debtors and joint proprietors, thereby putting a first charge over the Lloyd's of London guarantee in breach of Lloyd's of London rules. In 2009, I exited Lloyd's of London and Bank of Scotland were advised that the guarantee was cancelled, whereupon the Bank of Scotland should have cancelled the standard security in the registers of Scotland, which they failed to do. The reason being that unbeknown to me, in 2005, after breaching the multi-option facility contract I had with the bank for my commercial borrowings of 675,000, Bank of Scotland Private Banking surreptitiously created a second multi-option facility off ledger, coercing me in October 2007 into rebanking and repaying corporate banking the 675,000 that I had borrowed, while private banking continued charging me interest on the multi-option, the multi-option facility 2, which was a cyber account to which Bank of Scotland had unlawfully co-joined my wife in 2005, and our accountant didn't pick it up. In 2020, we obtained a Bloomberg property securitization analysis report, which showed that Halifax PLC and Bank of Scotland had in October 2007, at the point in which we had to rebank and repay my commercial borrowings, securitized this cyber debt, multi-option facility 2, by stating to the American Securities and Exchange Commission that we had acquired a 35-year, 695,000 interest-only FSA regulated mortgage contract, registered in the UK Land Registry on the 22nd of November 2007, rehypothecated and securitized as part of a $4.9 billion note issue underwritten by, amongst others, Lehman Brothers, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, and ABN AMRO. In 2011, Bank of Scotland Private Banking transferred the joint MOF2 cyber account offshore to Jersey. And in 2013, at a hearing before Sheriff O'Grady in Edinburgh Sheriff Court, at which I appeared as a party litigant and my wife had no legal representation, the bank solicitors and counsel representing Lloyds Bank International Limited, Jersey, in contempt of court, convinced the sheriff we had borrowed 695,000 against our home and granted decree against us. On the July 25th, 2014, we were ignominiously evicted and have been homeless since. Now, that's a pretty implausible tale to tell anyone, but we've been fighting to get restitution. And what we have discovered is that the Crown Office refuse to prosecute the bank's solicitors and counsel for their contempt, and prosecute the bank and their 4 witnesses whose perjured testimony cost us our home. They refuse to instruct the police to investigate. And because there is no crime number, the Crown will not prosecute. But we hope that we're putting pressure now on the Registers of Scotland to show that the title is flawed and it should be corrected. And we think that that pressure will eventually bring a prosecution of the bank and their solicitors and counsel. And I think that until we get that prosecution, we're not going to see any restitution.
Gordon, when I hear gentlemen like you talk, there comes a point where I almost have to stop listening, because it's just too sad for words. It's too long for words. And I know enough about your case to know that every word you've spoken tonight is absolutely true. And I also know that if I'd heard what you've just said to me 10 years ago, I would not have believed you. I wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah.
Gordon, thank you for sharing what you've told us all. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to go to our next speaker. We're going to go to Sue Flood. I need to move a few things around. Sue, could you give us as succinct as possible an outline?
Andy. Not so much. Hi, everybody.
Not so much in terms of what's happened to, not so much in terms of the series of events, but basically what has it meant to you and your family?
I've got it. Hi. 2011, I entered into a HMRC regulated FCA advisors advice, which took away mine and my partner's pensions. I had my children at a very late stage in my career because I wanted to get everything right and make sure that I, sorry, it gets hard, did everything as best as possible. On this guy's advice, backed by a G60, which is a fully qualified DB transfer agent, I took out the pension and I took a tax-free lump sum as advised, which put me into trouble with HMRC. I deem really, as I was overseas, a vulnerable person because I checked on the FCA register, I checked HMRC registration, I did all my due diligence thoroughly, and it all stacked up to be a legitimate situation. Consequently, on finding out that I'd lost all of my pension due to it being a scam, and the fact that HMRC, because they deemed it to be an unauthorised payment, which I wasn't advised about, I was issued with a 55% tax unauthorised payment charge. I had a breakdown. I was struggling. I'm sure most people on here understand those nights that you just can't sleep, you get up, you can hardly breathe, and you just cannot see the wood for the trees. I ripped my children out of Spain where they'd had their life. I just took them on a plane one day with a small bag and didn't really explain where we were going. They had no time to say goodbye to anybody in their life, and it was just taken away. Consequently, my kids had difficulties when we returned back to the UK. We've worked extremely hard these past 12 years to get ourselves in a better position to face the pending tax tribunals as a victim of a pension scam, deemed that I conspired with those scammers to put myself in this horrendous situation. Is that quick enough for you, Andy?
Yes, it is, Sue. I'll just add one or two quick things. Sue has been an exemplary campaigner for well over 10 years. And like other people within TTF, she has gone out of her way, motivated to just try to stop other human beings having the kind of experience that she's had. I know Sue well enough to really know and understand her motivations. And I promise you, there are really good people out there like Sue Flood and like many others who are here tonight who are just doing what they're doing in terms of campaigning to try to stop others having the pain and heartache and anguish that they've had. So thank you very, very, very
You're welcome,
much.
and thank you to everybody on here and Andy and your team, and continued efforts to everybody. We will get there, I'm sure.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. We're going to go to Clive May. Clive May's a lovely character. He really is a lovely character. Clive, over to you. Thank you.
That's it.
Oh, sorry, Andrew Page next. Andrew Page next. Then we'll be going to Clive May. Andrew, you're also a very nice character. Andrew, please speak. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. As succinctly as possible, please, Andrew. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be very brief. I'm coming at this from probably a different side in that I was an IFA for 25 years, unblemished record. I was introduced to a company called Hennessy Jones, now Redditon Capital. All kinds of bad things going on in the background that I found out about probably about 6 months after I'd been into it. I whistle blew to the FCA, who've done absolutely nothing with it other than use it against me. I've got the situation where some of the associates that were part of Hennessy Jones hacked into their server to establish that an undischarged bankrupt was actually running the company. They were paid £2.2 million to buy their silence. Foolishly, I whistle blew that to the FCA. I've contacted the Serious Fraud Office, who've said they're going to do nothing about it. I found out today, actually, that the individual that's involved with the scam has also used a property bond that's failed to the tune of 118 million. I found that out today. He's also involved with the Minerva Fund, and that's failed to the tune of about 14 million. I mean, this guy's made absolutely millions from it. There's so much malfeasance from dealing with the FCA in that, I mean, the FCA have placed it all on me. I've got some astronomical fine they've put on me. I'm just thinking, what else? There's so much. I've evidence, and I can evidence all that I state. I've evidence that the FCA blackmailed an award-winning pension trustee into changing the narrative of the fund, which caused, I'd say, a run on the fund, but gave a green light to all the claims management companies. And of course, my company then was just decimated by the claims. I've got numerous freedom of information requests that the FCA won't answer. It's just been a nightmare. I've got my MP involved. We've got nowhere. Written so many times. I'm on the verge of bankruptcy now, probably this week. So I've had 7 years of fighting the FCA, gone absolutely nowhere.
Andrew, thank you.
That's pretty much it, I think.
Andrew, thank you. Andrew, thank you very much. In a moment, I'll put into the chat the call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority that's attracted over 170 submissions. One of the important things for the TTF to do is to get support and engagement with parliamentarians and the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services. About a year and a bit ago, started what's turned out to be a remarkably productive exercise, a call for evidence about the Financial Conduct Authority. I haven't got much time to say more than that at the minute. We'll have to move on, but I will put a link into it in the chat shortly. Andrew Page, thank you very much indeed for sharing with us what you've done. I'm hoping that if nothing else, those of you who are feeling particularly down and despondent, can get some value, some comfort out of knowing you're not alone. You're not alone. There are others in a very, very similar state. Thanks, Andrew. Mr. Clive May, to you, please.
Evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, sir. Yeah.
Splendid. So unfortunately, NatWest decided to have me and my banking account. So what they did to me was they missold something called an Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme, which is a precursor to the bounce back loan. They basically said to me that they used it to repay off most of the overdraft, said they'd leave us with a remaining overdraft, chucked us into GRG, then tried to bust the company by pulling all the facilities. When I started raising complaints about the EFG on the mis-selling, similar to the post office, they said I was the only one, nobody had said anything. It turned out that after 4 years of fighting in 2015, Royal Bank of Scotland had to admit mis-selling this scheme, not just to me, but to 2,000 other people. They were in the Times recently said it cost them £9 million, but I know it cost them a lot more than that. But you go to the FCA, you go to the Serious Fraud Office, you go to all the places where you think you're going to get heard and nobody wants to know. It's as if all the doors start closing. Finally had a breakthrough beginning of this year when I was contacted by Julian Watt's bank signature forgery campaign saying the NCA had selected a number of people, 10 there was, and they wanted all my details. So I contacted the NCA, didn't hear anything. So I emailed, after reading some correspondence they sent to a Treasury Select Committee saying that they were investigating it and they contacted a number of individuals. I said to Treasury Select Committee, Kevin Ollingrate, who's been very supportive, that considering they said this in February, it was now May, that as I was one of the people they'd contacted, nobody had bothered to speak to me. Kevin Ollingrate raised an email to internally to who's now the head of the NCA, Graham Bigger. I wasn't aware of any of this till I did a subject access request. When I got a subject access request, it turned out, according to the NCA, they contacted me. I'd responded to them. My responses allowed them, to the 5 questions they called it, allowed them to conclude that North Wales Police had fully investigated my case. Therefore, they chucked it out the investigation. The problem for the NCA was they hadn't contacted me. They made it all up. So when you've got this level of, I had I've raised it with the IOPC, and I basically said to the bloke from the IOPC, it's like it's like the elite people, the elite police force have contacted you. You don't expect them to go on the side of the banks, make up investigations basically against the victims. So when you go to the police, when you go to the government, when you go to the regulators, you're the enemy. They don't want to know you. You're raising issues that they don't want to hear about. So, you've got to be in it for the long term. And it does affect you. It affects your health. It affects you, well, certainly mental health, that's for sure. But you just have to keep fighting these people. And I'll be in it for the long term. And well done to everybody on here for doing the same.
Clive, thank you. Clive, thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you. Again, for those of you that might be on the periphery, you might be saying to yourself, this just can't all be true. It is all true. And if anybody is seriously questioning that it's true, please write to me, ask me whatever questions you want, and we'll be able to evidence everything that is being spoken tonight. Clive, thank you very, very much indeed. If Louise is with us, can Louise please speak? Louise, your particular story covers so many areas. Oh, yeah. Could I please invite you, Louise, just to focus on one small bit of it, and I know it's only one small bit of it, which is the financial bit around the, frankly, the fraudulent use of the fraudulent insurances that you've been harmed by. Just please talk briefly about that, Steve. Louise, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Right. So basically, I discovered what I believe to be a fraud ring operating within the legal expense insurance industry. So the setup is an insurance company employs what they refer to as a legal claims management firm to deal with legal expense claims. And in theory, what's supposed to happen is that when someone makes an application under the insurance policy, they should be given legal representation through what they call a panel solicitor, who is a solicitor firm that's employed by the claim management company on behalf of the insurer. And through some very serious events in my life, I unfortunately it became necessary for me to make 4 claims in a short period of time on my legal expense policy. One of those claims related to a professional negligence claim involving a very serious claim that I brought against a police authority when I made a protected disclosure at my place of work. And all 4 of the claims were dealt with in very suspicious circumstances. They were rejected without, 3 of them without even examining any of my case papers or asking me any questions. In fact, not even contacting me at all. I received no contact from the panel solicitor. I became suspicious of this. I had a second policy, the same type of policy as I had made the original claims on, I had with another insurer, and I should have been entitled to raise professional negligence claims against the parties who dealt with my original claims on policy 1. However, when I went to policy 2, the same thing happened, and I became aware that it was the same claim management company managing those claims on policy 2 as it was on policy 1. And I also became aware that there were close connections and conflicts between the parties who had dealt with policy 1 and policy 2. And unbelievably, I had a third policy. Again, the same thing happened once more, and all my claims were rejected. At this point, I was convinced that something rogue was going on. I looked online, I found other victims on a Trustpilot with multiple stories of fraud alleging the same things that I was against the same parties. And the core of this really explodes when I tried to get help from the various authorities. I was convinced that these were crimes that had been committed against me. I didn't believe they were service failures or things that the Ombudsman could deal with. However, I made my presentations to the Financial Ombudsman and all the other parties, such as the SFO, the FCA, City of London Police, all of the organisations. And the FOSS took 3 years to come back to me. So this was running parallel to the other presentations I was making to the justice organisations. But instead of my allegations to the justice organisations being investigated, they themselves dealt with my allegations fraudulently or completely ignored them. And each told me that it was someone else that dealt with my allegations. But when I went to that further body, they put me back to where I'd came from. I went round in circles for 3 years trying to get this help, and I was going crazy by this time, realising something really bad is going on here. And I approached my MP. I then wrote to my MP for nearly 3 years trying to get his help, because I discovered that the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman is the organisation that deals with allegations of governmental corruption, and only an MP can sign off your allegations to be investigated by that organisation. But instead of my MP doing so, he ignored me for the majority of the time. He then had a police authority come and threaten me with arrest. And I was incapacitated for 6 months. I got my wits about me in May of this year and attempted to take legal action against my MP. I contacted just under 200 solicitors, none of whom could help me. I taught myself how to lodge writs, and I lodged a writ against my MP and the police authority, and those were accepted. And then the police came to my home in September this year, arrested me, charged me with stalking my MP, and confiscated all of my devices. I'm currently waiting to find out what's going to happen with that. I've contacted 150 solicitors trying to get criminal representation, and none of them can help me because of the complexity of my case. So I know I have spent my entire 14 years, in fact, documenting this. I have 250,000 pages of evidence, and I can't get anyone to admit responsibility for investigating any of this, and I've become a recluse and completely devoted myself to investigating this myself.
Louise, thank you. I don't know what else to say. Louise, thank you so much for having the courage to share this. Thank you very much. We're going to go to Ian Davis, then we'll go to Mark Bishop. Thank you, Louise. Mr. Davis, please take yourself off mute and just share for a couple of minutes what's happened to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. My name is Ian Davis. Unfortunately, I was a victim of London Capital Finance back in 2018. Anyway, I suppose to actually help myself get over it, I just decided to get stuck into it and do an investigation. And it all started off with one of the solicitors. I discovered he was a, well, he was also, apart from being a solicitor, who created the security trustee, who was also on the borrowing companies, and he also acted as London Capital Finance's solicitor as well. Created the security trustee, which claimed to have 120 years service. This turned out to be a dormant company, which has only been established 7 months before. That was a complete lie. This was actually in the London Capital Finance promotion, which is also promoted by an FCA regulated company called Sentient Capital. There was another thing, the law firm, it was claimed to be Bus Merton LLP. That company didn't even exist. It was struck off in 2015 with a £2.9 million debt. And also there was a company which was called GC Partners. It also saying it shared the same address as the Global Security Trustees when it was taken over by the Boss of London Capital Finance. So basically the Boss of London Capital Finance controlled the security trustee for 7 months. That's just the start of it. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, I've got around 70,000 files on London Capital Finance, all this fraud and corruption. It's like a giant spider's web. There's about 350 companies involved in this, which I'm currently watching, all kind of linked. And this is actually linked to total global crime. It's actually unbelievable. There's chartered accountants involved with it. There's solicitors involved with it. There's connection to well-known fraudsters. One of the borrowers of London Capital Finance, who was actually a chartered accountant, 2 of his friends have just been jailed for a total of 27 years. I've even got a wedding video of this chap at this chap's 50th birthday. Anyway, all this evidence has been sent to the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. Basically, all I'm trying to do is just basically say that this chap's not acting with integrity. He shouldn't be a chartered accountant. He should be struck off. But that's just the very, very basic. I haven't really gone for all the sort of criminal stuff. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I've been battling with 2 years. My case was dropped by the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Wales, and they basically lied to the Financial Reporting Council. To cut a long story short, I've had the case reopened. That's just currently going on. I've got reported other people to the Financial Conduct Authority who are also acting with criminals. The FCA, again, will not do anything to remove these individuals. And it's just the same story as everyday else. You get stonewalled by all the governmental departments. You have the National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office, NFIB, Kent Police, City of London Police. I've been through a whole lot, written letters to emails, Boris, Rishi Sunak, basically all the ministers had basically correspondence from him, never had a reply. Lord Chief Justice never had a reply. And it's just it's just like bashing your head against a brick wall, basically. Yeah, so that's my story. It's the same as everybody else's, really. Yeah.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. And again, if anybody's unconvinced that what's being discussed tonight is true and authentic, then get in touch with me, and I'll do what I can to show you the proof that you need to believe what's been going on. Where this takes us is to the key question, which is, what can we do about this? And Mark Bishop's going to be sharing with you what we think would actually make a real difference. And it's going to require everybody to do something that everybody can do. Some of you maybe have already done it, but if you haven't, please do spend the 10, 15, 20 minutes or so tomorrow morning, if not tonight, doing what it is Mark Bishop's going to explain that we need you to do. Mark Bishop, over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Andy. I'm going to share screen and show some slides. So the first thing to say is that I'm not somebody kind of looking at this from an ivory tower. I'm a scam victim. I had £300,000 in the Connaught Income Fund Series 1, and I've spent the best part of a decade trying to unravel that particular criminal endeavour and regulatory failure scam. And we've been, between us, been able to get back a proportion of the investor's original capital, about 75 to 80%, but not 100% of it, and certainly none of the income that would have been generated, or returns that would have been generated if the money had been invested in something that wasn't a scam. So there's a lot of outstanding money there. A lot of time costs been put into it. Effectively, it cost me my career at the age of 43. And so, I am very much in the position of everybody else on this call. But I'm not here to talk about that case, or not about my own experiences. I'm here to talk about the big issues that I believe affect everybody. And it's this: misconduct is widespread in the financial services sector. And that's because perpetrators and enablers get away with it, and they make loads of money. The FCA, if it does anything at all, does too little, too late. It is largely unaccountable and opaque, and far too close to the Treasury and the industry. You can't sue it, and you cannot get compensation from the complaint scheme. Basically, it's above the law, and most of the people in the industry are also above the law. So how can you make things right for yourself and society? Well, every cloud has a silver lining. And the great thing about, an industry that behaves badly and a regulator that is at best complacent and at worst actually captured or conflicted, is that the evidence is stacking up. I'm sure many of you saw the panorama that went out in middle of August called the £1 billion savings scandal. There's a link to it in my slides, and I'll upload them in a moment. You probably heard our briefly new PM talking about the view that the FCA was not doing a great job. She was thinking about merging it with the PRA, which is probably not the right solution, but at least she understood that there was a problem there. And if she was thinking it, and she's perhaps not the brightest star in the sky, one might think that other people have been thinking it as well for a while. And then there is the call for evidence about the FCA being undertaken by the APPG on personal banking and fairer financial services, for which we provide the Secretariat. And that will be absolutely astounding. Some of the evidence that I've seen on that, only a small proportion of it is currently in the public domain, is frankly quite shocking. There is the Financial Services and Markets Bill coming up as well. That is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reset financial services regulation. Some people here may love Brexit, other people may hate it, but the fact is that it does create not just the opportunity, but the necessity to onshore the oversight of UK financial regulation. Because that bill is going through, even if the intention of those proposing it is to actually strengthen the industry and the Treasury's kind of stranglehold on regulation, they're actually laying themselves open to the possibility that the bill may be amended by people who have other things in mind, and that therefore will achieve good things for consumers. So it's basically open season to try and get it modified in a way that will help consumers. It should pass into law by late spring of 2023. And the opportunities to amend are really about new rights and protections, and focusing on righting acknowledged historical wrongs and anomalies. So this is your opportunity to get justice and to protect those coming up behind us. Now, the three amendments that Transparency Task Force is proposing, can each of them be summed up by one little kind of motherhood and apple pie statement that we hope most people will agree with. So our first amendment can be summed up with this phrase: if you, meaning the regulators, screw up, you pay up. Why shouldn't people pay up when they cause other people loss and suffering? The FCA has enjoyed immunity from civil liability since the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000. The complaint scheme, which was there to avoid, in theory, people having to sue the FCA, doesn't work. The regulators, unfortunately, were allowed to set the rules, and surprise, surprise, they set the rules up in such a way that you can't get compensation for regulatory failure. They also appoint the complaints commissioner, and she is a controversial individual. They set her budget and they ignore her findings, and she herself says these things are anomalies. And I quote her, talking to the Treasury Committee: ex gratia compensation payments due to regulatory failures on the part of the FCA will in practice never be available to complainants. Our proposed amendment won't surprise you, therefore, It should mandate that the complaint scheme covers regulatory failure losses. It should make the Complaints Commissioner's findings binding on the regulators. Currently, they're just advisory. It should end the immunity of the FCA from civil liability, and it should disapply the Limitation Act for the first 6 years so that people have an opportunity to sue for their past losses if they cannot get justice through the complaint scheme. Of course, we hope that they will get it that way, so don't have the cost of litigation. And also create a backstop by doing this, whereby the FCA, if it's unable or unwilling to secure redress from firms, will have to pay out itself. This will make the industry very much more on the hook, because the regulator doesn't want to pay up for having failed to get money out of the industry. If you look at Woodford, just one of the examples of a really high profile case, they would have not just one but two routes to redress from the FCA, where currently they have none. The Second Amendment can be summed up by this one sentence: what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. We all believe that things should be fair, don't we? So actually, if the FCA should have to pay up when it has screwed up, why shouldn't the industry as well? Consumers have been campaigning for what's known as a duty of care since the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000. A duty of care is an obligation on one party, in this case authorised persons, to avoid causing reasonably foreseeable harm to another party, in this case consumers, breach of which gives rise to a civil liability. Therefore, you can sue in the courts. It's called a tort. It would be owed by authorised persons, as I say, to consumers. And in last year, we thought we were there. Parliament passed the Financial Services Act 2021, and it obliged the FCA to consult on and then implement rules about a duty of care. Unfortunately, the industry and the FCA didn't like this very much, so they instead decided to consult on and introduce something inferior called the consumer duty. There are a great many exemptions that would not apply in a duty of care. For example, if the authorised firm hands you over to an unauthorised firm, probably not liable. If there's no contractual link, probably no liability. Historical injustices are not dealt with. Exit fees and other egregious stuff like that can remain within ambit of what's allowed. And crucially, and this is the most important thing, the consumer duty does not carry a private right of action, which means if a firm breaches the duty, the consumer duty, and you suffer a loss, the only way you're getting compensation is if the FCA not only enforces against that firm, but it also issues a restitution order against that firm. It does that most years 0 times. Sometimes it does it once. So in practice, you're never going to get your money back. Whereas if you had a private right of action, which you would by definition with duty of care, you can go to court and get your money back. Our proposed amendment therefore will not surprise you. It's a statutory duty of care to be owed by authorised persons to consumers. One of the great advantages of this is that it makes the enablers, by which I mean authorised firms that help unauthorised ones to commit wrongdoing, liable. And very many of the scams that we see are ones like that. It's the authorised firm that approves a financial promotion that an unauthorised one uses. When things go wrong, the authorised firm says, oh, terribly sorry, we didn't realise that they would operate the scheme differently than was described in the information memorandum. Well, of course, it's your duty to make sure that the promotion you approve actually is honest and operates as described, but there's no liability there. Another one is the authorised firm that appoints what's called approved representatives, and these appointed representatives, those go out there acting as if they were an independent firm without any control and supervision by the firm that sponsored them. And when things go wrong, of course, the firm that appointed these appointed representatives, oh, terribly sorry, we could never have foreseen that this thing would have happened. We're not paying up. And the last thing which it does, which is really significant, is that in law, the phrase authorised persons in financial services means the individuals that are on the FCA register, as well as the firms. So the key managers, senior managers and other people like that, if they're on the FCA register, you can sue them as well. And this, of course, is fantastic because it means they can't just go away, walk away from an insolvent firm and start up something again. You can bankrupt them. And this is, of course, something that the FCA in its senior managers regime should be doing all the time, but it never does. The numbers of, in fact, I did a Freedom of Information request about a year ago. The number of people who suffered actual enforcement action as a result of the senior managers regime is actually 2. There are 2 of them. That's pretty appalling, isn't it? Amendment 3, again, I'm trying to sum these things up with a single sentence. sunlight is the best disinfectant. The FCA is currently answerable to 3 industry panels and only 1 consumer one. The Financial Services and Markets Bill, as currently drafted, would change the industry representation to 5 or even 6, depending on how you count them, versus still there only being 1 consumer one. Bear in mind that the consumer one is consumer in inverted commas. That members are appointed by the FCA. Andy and I have applied to be members. I think Andy may have applied to be chair of it, and we've been turned down. It mustn't criticise the FCA without forewarning, not allowed to do that. And it's also been misbriefed about its role. It's been told that its role is advisory. Of course, it can give advice, but its role is not limited to advice. What the law actually says is it has the right to make representations, and the FCA must either act on the representations or explain why it is not doing so. So there is a comply or explain regime. But what they've actually been told is you've got an advisory role. If we're thinking of doing something, we, the FCA, will knock on your door and say, what do you think? Should actually be the other way around. The FCA's operational objectives have to do with consumer protection, competition and market integrity, and these things impact hugely on consumers. And yet, as you can see, the genuine voices of consumers are very seldom heard. So what do we need? We need a consumer-led oversight body, much like the one that operates in Australia. So our proposed amendment is to introduce something called the Financial Regulators Supervision Council, and there's a link there. We call it the FRSC for short. What would its role be? Well, it would have an impact to hiring and firing certain key figures in the governance of the regulator, jointly with the Treasury, the FCA Chair and Chief Executive. Currently, the Treasury appoints those on its own. On its own, it would be appointing 2 of the FCA non-executive directors. These are the ones supposedly representing consumer interests. They used to be appointed by the National Consumer Council, but now, because that was abolished, it's the Business Department, and in practice, it's the Treasury. It would appoint the director of the Financial Ombudsman Service. At the moment, the FCA appoints those, which is clearly a conflict of interest. It would appoint the members and chairs of the consumer panel. Again, these people should be independent of the regulator, so not appointed by it. And the complaints commissioner, who is appointed jointly by the financial regulators, but in practice the FCA, because most of the complaints are about the FCA. It would be involved in certain types of review. Annually, it would review the FCA and the regulatory regime. And currently, nobody is doing that. Periodically, it would review the FCA's treatment of whistleblowers and their evidence. Again, nobody's doing it. It would commission and oversee independent reviews of the regulator's performance following regulatory failures. At the moment, the FCA commissions those things itself and has extensive powers to control the terms of reference, the access to information and to people, and to Maxwellize, to redact information from the report and try and get changes to it. So again, this is about making the thing genuinely independent. Finally, it would oversee the complaint scheme rules, budgets, and also payments to make sure that payments were actually made. Currently, the regulators oversee this, or nobody does it. So if you believe that these 3 amendments would be useful, could help you get justice, and could help prevent the kind of things that have happened to you, question is, what should you do now? First thing is, you should join Transparency Task Force if you haven't already, and subscribe. Please pay a membership fee. No matter how small, if you pay something towards the membership, we will have resources that we can use to do the good work that we do. If you know other people that have been affected, please get them to subscribe as well. We need their support, we need their time, we need their money. And of course, it is really great that you subscribe, but if there's anything you can do to help us raise serious money, that would be really useful as well. So for example, Funding for Social Change, what a remarkable organisation, how fantastic that they supported this report. And I wish that they would consider actually supporting other things, like, for example, wouldn't it be great if we could employ somebody who was a specialist in lobbying and had really great skills that would help us to get huge impact with politicians? You know, things like that cost money. But when you think about the number of lobbyists that are employed by the industry, where are the lobbyists for consumers? You know, there's got to be some kind of equivalence of voice. But actually, the big call, the thing we really most need you to do, that Andy was mentioning just before I came on, is to write to your MP. And this letter basically says, you know, here is something terrible that happened to me. whichever of the investment scams, or whatever pension liberation scam, or whatever it was that you suffered, you write this letter, which is based on a template that we've put on the TTF website, and you send it to your MP. There are 3 versions, one for Blackmore investors. Most of you don't need to worry about that. There's only a few Blackmore investors on this call. There is another one for other campaigners and stakeholders. So you've not lost any money, but you are campaigning for us. Only a few people will be in that category, but most of you on this call, victims of other regulatory failure cases, and you'll see there's a letter for that. So there is a link in my presentation, and I'm sure that Andy will circulate it afterwards, to template letters and full instructions on how to use them. And so just finally, the key messages are, please support our amendments to the Financial Services and Markets Bill. The drafts are available on the link above, and please also let us know what response you get from your MP. So that's me largely done. I think I've stopped sharing my slides now. Over to Andy.
Mark, thank you very, very much indeed. Absolutely superb. You've covered that complex and detailed ground very succinctly and very, very, very clearly. We are very grateful. I'm going to spend the next few minutes emphasising some key points, okay, some absolutely key points. The first thing I'm going to do is share my screen because I want to show you a quote. It's a quote from somebody called Saul Alinsky. You've probably not heard of Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky was a campaigner in Chicago in the 60s and 70s, and Saul Alinsky made a massive contribution to social reform in the US. The quote I'm highlighting here is this one: "No politician can sit on a hot issue if you make it hot enough." Great thought. No politician can sit on a hot issue if you make it hot enough. As the Transparency Task Force evolves and grows, we are becoming more and more capable of making issues so hot that politicians will not just sit on them, they will take action. So what Marcus just explained, this letter campaign to the politicians is phenomenally important. It really, really is. So this is what it's all about. It's all about the campaign to write to the MPs off the back of the Panorama programme. I'll put a link to this page in the chat in just a moment. If you haven't already done so, either download letter 1, which is for victims of Blackmore Bond, or download letter 2, which is for victims of other investment scams, or download letter 3, which is for everybody else. Okay, I'll just show you how easy it is to do this if you haven't already done it. You download the document. All you have to do is click on the relevant link. You go to File, you go to Download, and it will download it for you into Microsoft Word. It's that simple. The yellow text is your instructions. So you, for example, put dear name of your MP, you put your address and your postcode in there, etc., etc., etc. It makes it as easy and straightforward as possible for you to do what needs to be done. The thinking has already been done for you, and if you want to amend the letter in some way, you are allowed to do it. You can do that. Roughly 400 of these letters have already been sent. We're being copied in on the correspondence going to the MPs and coming back, and we're doing, I think, a really good job of extracting campaign leverage out off the back of this. So please make sure you do that if you haven't done it already. It's incredibly important you do. Now, before I forget to do it, I'm going to put the link to the web page I just showed you, where you can download the letters in the chat. In a few minutes, we're going to be wrapping up, folks. But just before we do, can I please take this opportunity to thank everybody who's spoken tonight, particularly those of you who've opened up your hearts and souls and told everybody what's happened to you. I'm absolutely convinced that if we carry on doing the sorts of things we are doing, we're going to have a greater and greater and greater impact. What I'm going to do now, folks, is I'm just going to go to gallery view so I can see everybody on my Zoom screen. And I'm just going to look for anybody waving at me who's itching to say something before we wrap the session up. So please wave either literally or digitally to me if you do want to share a thought. Otherwise, we'll quickly bring the session to a close. Wave now or forever hold your peace. I think everyone's done, which is great. We'll wrap it up there. In which case, let's end the session by simply showing our own appreciation to ourselves again for acting as a civilized community who are looking to drive change in this marketplace that really does need reforming. We need positive, progressive and purposeful reform. This sector needs sorting out. We the people can do it if we do two things: get organised and get busy. That's the key to our success. Get organised and get busy. The rest of it will fall into place. Thank you all very, very much indeed, particularly our speakers tonight. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Cheers, guys and girls. Thank you.
Well, I do hope you found that video useful and informative in some way. Please do remember, if you haven't already done so, become either a subscription member or make a donation. Both of the links you need are coming up on your screen now. And they're also in the video description. Thanks again. Thank you.